Well, here we are in the state of Oregon, and we're looking at some land. Right now, there's no cattle, and we have a riparian area over to the left, a riparian and some of the wildlife area to the right of the tree, and out in the field we have a little bit of a breeze coming up. The Sprague River is right below us, so that's interesting, and we're in bear and cougar country. I'm standing on a bear track, or close to it right now. There's a cougar print over there, and they look relatively fresh, so they're around as well. Maybe we'll get one in the background when I'm standing there talking and don't see it. I don't know. But the fact is, this is the kind of situation that we talk about when we're talking about saving a lot of the environment and actually saving our public lands for the purpose of non-industry, non-agriculture, and kind of get into the very use of it within the multiple purpose category that it's in. Right now, most Americans are being shoved off public lands. If the Americans that want to go out and just pop up a chair over here and observe everything that's over there, I mean, or if I want to come over here and I actually want to have a barbecue with the family and kids, well, I have to be careful. Further down the road, you got to be careful because you have to dodge cow crap, and it's everywhere. And this river, the Sprague River that's right below me, turns a metallic brown during the spring runoff. This isn't nature. Metallic brown is not a natural color. Metallic brown, with all the toxins that are in it, yes, we had it measured, and we had the lab go over some of the items on a weekly basis for about a month and a half. And we found several toxins. They would basically get in the water from the pasture runoff, and then actually this water isn't drinkable. And I don't think it's drinkable right now. As a matter of fact, I don't think any of it's drinkable down there. But what we see is, and that's from up there. Now we see that there's an ecological zone here. It's a little bit different than the one we were at with a 75 or 90 mile radius from human involvement whatsoever, thank God. But what we find here is consequences. And what I mean by consequences, well, we find the toxins in the water. We can go and run some of this, the bushes and some of the grassed area that's along the river and in those meadows and that kind of thing, and we can find toxins. We're not supposed to find toxins in habitable areas where humans exist and where wildlife exists. That's irresponsible conduct. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about lands and wildlife that are being sacrificed for something that, quite frankly, is being shoved down the American citizens' throats. This beef thing, or the sheep. The sheep, not so much. The sheep industry is going down. That much is for sure. We're finding that some of the numbers in that statistically are heading downward, and that's where they should be. Personally, I like sheep, but I also understand the industry. I like cattle, but I also understand the industry. But in understanding that industry, that doesn't mean that I'm going to go out and I'm going to sacrifice every damn thing that I have, and I'm going to watch our government sacrifice every damn thing that we have here in America that is all of ours. We have representatives, which this is based upon, America. We have representatives that represent us, the American taxpayer, the American citizen. We don't need to sacrifice a whole lot here in America because we have natural resources and food supplemental chains that will take care of us. We have ecological zones, ecological process that we know, and we can manage them. We can actually let nature be itself. And that's in a lot of different circumstances. We can let the moderation of wildlife develop within a natural happenstance. When you have a healthy ecological zone, and people are now going, well, what is a healthy ecological zone? Well, it is not, I can tell you, beyond all situations and beyond all opinions that the Bureau of Land Management science and the forestry science right now is totally bogus, and it's based on misinformation. It's based on overpopulation lies about the wild horses on our public and federal lands, the forestry, and they're all covered by the Wild Horse and Burro Act, by the way. The Wild Horse and Burro Act is a law that gives us the right, by our paying for all of this, the right to have wild horses belong to us. What they have legally from the Wild Horse and Burro Act of 1971, which was passed unanimously, of course, in 1971, the only good thing that Richard Nixon gave us was the wild horses. Now we have government agencies that are sitting there shoving cattle down our throat, and they give bogus information. I'll repeat that. They give bogus information in regard to the wild horse counts. This is significant. And how do we know this? Well, number one, good science tells us this. Good science shows us this. And it is statisticians that tell us the fact that a lot of the numbers that the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service give us are biological impossibilities. I'll repeat that. They are biological impossibilities. Once we run the numbers and peruse the numbers, we find there's a lot of falsities within the 20 or 30 or whatever percent they use across the board birth rates, for the simple fact that horses die. They get old and die, they get crippled and die. The predator-prey relationship in a healthy ecological system and a healthy process within that ecological system gives us the moderation of population very precise, because nature isn't wrong. Nature is never wrong. And they don't, you know, so once again, we find the Bureau of Land Management and the USDA Forest Service sitting there doing these bogus counts. Biological impossibilities. 50% of foal death occurs on our public lands every breeding season. Let me repeat that. 50% foal death occurs every breeding season. And that's a very strong number, by the way. That's been researched, that's been perused, that's been looked at. We have no reason to doubt those numbers. Because I see it. I go out into lands like this and I observe wild horses. Quite frankly, there's some wild horses right over there. So that's why I'm not naming this spot. But I will say that between the 50% death rate of full birth on public lands, as well as the probably 17 to 18% death rate of wild horses on public lands because of age, whatever. Some even go up to 32%. So we have a very small margin of birth that actually lives through the first year, and then we have a carryover of within the first year to the first 3 years we have a death rate of probably 16%. And that's a fairly accurate number. There isn't anything wrong with that number that I've seen on public lands. But to give it 20% across the board, well, everything lives, nothing dies on public lands, that is bigotry and bias, which equates to ignorance in total. Excuse me, I have a dry throat, so it's really hot today. Although it is early fall, it's really hot in the grasses, and I'm standing in this shrub. And the fact is, we have some problems with the Bureau of Land Management and the Department of Interior and the USDA Forest Service and their research. and to make room for more cattle on our public lands, stop shoving cattle down our throats. That's uncalled for. A lot of people don't eat meat these days, and there's less and less on a daily basis that is eating beef at all. We have domestic sales of public lands beef under the Grazing Permit Program is less than 1%. But yet, and this is what a lot of taxpayers don't realize, we pay over $1.4 billion a year for subsidies to subsidize grazing permit lands beef production. Once again, let's let that sink for a while. Think about that for a minute. We pay over $1 billion to subsidize an industry that sells domestically less than 1% of its product. And when we start talking about throwaway margins for the beef, commercial beef industry, according to USDA statistics, we're still sitting there between 28 and 32% throwaway margins. So you can see that public lands beef is not fulfilling any kind of game whatsoever, any kind of plan, any kind of business plan, any kind of science plan. There's nothing there for them. Now you want to start talking moderation, there could be something there for them and that kind of thing. You don't need to kill off every damn thing in these environments in order to graze your damn beef out there. You don't need that. It's unnecessary. I'm a horse guy. I like horses, that's true. My bias is toward horses, but I've been raised in the country in small towns most of my life. And some of this is just not making any common sense. And to be called that we're trying to take people's rights away? No, when we're sitting there talking about, hey, you don't have to kill off these 5,000 little critters over here and the wildlife over here and all the damn horses because they're not doing anything. They're just living in their environment. You have invaded their environment with an invasive species cattle, which, by the way, let me clarify something real quick. Because of the Wild Horse and Burro Act of 1971, horses have a right to be on their land. There's no ratification of any kind of amendment or any kind of truthful situation that has changed that Wild Horse and Burro Act of 1971, although the BLM and the U.S. Forest Service want you to think that. That's a lie. They do lie. Gee, imagine that. A government agency lying. Oh my God. So, we're paying for a vast amount of lies. Myself and others are always out here. We're observing what horses do. That's how we can talk about horses, wild horses in particular, so fluidly, is because we're out here, we're observing it. The people that are supposedly doing the science and coming up with this and, well, we better remove those horses because they're doing a lot of damage. Well, prove it. Because up to this point it hasn't been proved. And locking in horses by a pond up there at Modak and for about 3 weeks, and right after cattle has grazed that entire area off and have gone through there and basically wrecked the pond, and you put 100 horses into a pond area and then lock the gates, that's what we call crap science. What the more moderate conservative researcher calls malicious science. Because it's a lie. It's based on misinformation. It's based on false controlling the data when it's happening. So actually they're deriving data that is false. It's misinformed, and to actually put that forth and actually create a budget from that is also fraud, which is covered in the federal laws under U.S. federal fraud. So we have several things going that they have to cover up in order to keep doing it. In order to have cattle on this land, they have to misinform the public, they have to break laws, and they actually have to set aside the Wild Horse and Burro Act and ignore it in total, and confuse the issue and create dissension and that kind of thing between all the people that are involved with horses. That's what they do. And you can check on that yourself. It's easily checkable because the statistics are out there and you can see it. You can see the biological impossibilities that they try to purvey in order to cover up their fraudulent activity to obtain budgets within the government. And believe me, out of that well over $1 billion in government subsidies that go to the welfare ranching ranchers on public lands for cattle. That's where that billions of dollars is going. Can you imagine how just over 5 years and whatnot, we're talking about billions, and they're shutting down the Veterans Administration emergency rooms? I know at least 5 people that never got artificial limbs from the Iraq War because they didn't have the budget for it. And yet I see welfare ranchers obtain $3 or $4 million a year, and they're already rich, for crying out loud. You know, you got corporate write-offs. You have the small rancher that's getting about 180 or 200,000, covers his total. We the taxpayers are covering their total underline. Now remember that cattle industry and the Grazing Permit Program is a privilege. It's designated as a privilege by the U.S. government. It's not a right. Those are revocable privileges. Let me repeat that. That's a revocable privilege that can be taken away at any given time, with the exception of the BLM and the USDA have a lot of ranchers in there that are overseeing and administering the Grazing Permit Program. This Grazing Permit Program, folks, is corrupt 100%. It's a corrupt government program that needs to go away. They have fertility drugs right now that's costing the taxpayers several millions of dollars a year, and there's no overpopulation of wild horses. It's an underpopulation of wild horses. Now what? We still have the emergency rooms at the Veterans Administration shutting down. We still have people that go to war, don't get their limbs. We got programs in the United States for schools that fed kids that have been, the budgets have been taken away. But yet, we seem to get increases in this Grazing Permit Program on federal lands, which sells less than 1% domestic product of beef to our domestic markets. So you tell me if that makes sense, because it doesn't make sense to me. I'm just a small town guy. I'm a disabled veteran. This, as far as I'm concerned, these welfare ranching communities and that kind of thing are disrespecting veterans. I don't care what their myth is. I don't care what they lie about, but I do care when they start disrespecting veterans and taking away food from kids. That really bothers me. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm talking to you today. Thank you.